Hello, I'm Belkis Perez. Today on Coral Gables Now, we are entering in what's traditionally been the most active period for hurricanes. Why hurricane preparedness is so important. Do you have one of these? We'll tell you how this hurricane door hanger may be able to get help to seniors faster after a storm.
Have you caught yourself doing that lately? We've got several tips on how to avoid getting bitten by mosquitoes on City News.
Plus, some students at Coral Gables Senior High are eligible for a scholarship that can help put them through college.
Coral Gables is known as a historic city and even as a tree city. But did you know it's also known as a playful city? I'll have that story coming up later on in the show.
Find out why city founder George Merrick would be proud of this resident. Coral Gables Now starts right now. Welcome to the award-winning Coral Gables Now. I'm Belkis Perez. We are now entering into one of the most active months for hurricanes. South Florida is a hotspot for storms, and although we have had few years with relatively little hurricane activity, we cannot let our guard down. Robert Molleda from the National Weather Service at the Miami Forecast Office joins us now with more. Thank you for being here, Robert.
It's my pleasure.
So tell me about your role with the National Weather Service.
Well, my role, I'm the warning coordination meteorologist. Basically what that means is I'm the main person that does the outreach for the office, which means I do talks all across South Florida to different business, civic groups. I also coordinate, work together with local officials, emergency management, both at the city and county level. Essentially, sort of the face of the office, if you will, in the community.
So trying to get the word out to people about it. And we should point out that Robert has also given talks to the seniors at the Adult Activity Center, preparing them for what they need to do. And that's why we decided to have you on the show. Really good information there. So let's start off by asking you, what effect does Coral Gables' geographic location have when it comes to impact if a storm would come to our area?
Well, Coral Gables is kind of unique as far as the geography is concerned, because it's both an inland portion, but there's also a coastal section. Now, most of Coral Gables is inland, so you don't really have to worry much about the storm surge. However, the exception to that being areas east of Old Cutler Road, Gables by the Sea, that area obviously would be within a surge zone. Therefore, that's why that area isn't an evacuation zone, because of the threat of a storm surge in case of a direct landfall. But other than that, we have obviously the wind is always a factor in hurricanes, or can be, even tropical storms for that matter. But it's not just the wind. We have rainfall, which causes flooding, and even we have the threat of isolated tornadoes. So the threat from hurricanes really comes from several different hazards or sources, if you will.
And then what's the most active time for hurricanes right now in South Florida?
Well, historically speaking, the most active part of the hurricane season is August, September, and October. That's not just South Florida, but also across the entire Atlantic Ocean. Now, if we break down the number of hurricanes that have hit South Florida during those months, you find that October, we've had more hurricanes strike South Florida during October than any other month. But that doesn't mean that September and August fall behind. Obviously, once we get to the heart of hurricane season, we really have to be ready.
That's very interesting, that October, because you would think you'd be winding down, but that's very good information. Another thing, and we've heard this a lot before, you know, people do become complacent. We haven't had a direct impact here in a while, and so without that much activity, there's you know, when there is a possibility of a storm coming, a lot of people just wait to the last minute, or they don't heed the warnings. What do you think's going on there?
I think it's hard to categorize everyone's reaction. People react different ways. Some people prepare well ahead of time, which is obviously what everyone should do. Some people decide to wait until the last second. Obviously, the advice that we give as also local officials the advice they give is that we need to be ready ahead of time. We need to make sure that we have our food and water and batteries and all supplies well ahead of time. That way, when a hurricane does threaten us, or if it does threaten us, we're pretty much ready to go. We don't have to run out to the store and stand in long lines before a storm approaches, and that's really also the best way to not only keep ourselves and our families safe, but also keep our properties as safe as possible. So really, it's all about following the advice of local officials who are in close contact with the National Weather Service when a storm approaches to take the best appropriate action.
Robert, we've got a lot of people here and throughout South Florida that move into the area every year. Tell me about, if they've never been through a hurricane and don't know what to expect as far as damage is concerned, how can you prepare them for that? What do you tell them?
That's actually one of the main challenges we face here, is that we have a lot of new residents every year, and many of these new residents come from areas that don't experience hurricanes. So it's not just a complacency issue, it's also educating new residents. The first thing that we always advise new residents is to understand, the hurricane history here in South Florida. We don't get hit every year. It's not like we're going to get hit every single year, thank goodness. However, we are the most hurricane-prone part of the country, so we will get hit sooner or later. It may be several years, and maybe back-to-back years. The main thing is we need to treat every storm the same. In other words, every storm, even the tropical storms, pose a threat, whether it's from the wind, which of course can down trees, down power lines, and that's why we lose power often for several days or even weeks. We could have threat from flooding from rainfall, especially in low-lying areas. South Florida is prone to flooding from rainfall, and residents near the bay have to be concerned about storm surge. Hurricane Andrew produced a pretty significant storm surge in that part of Coral Gables there. A lot of people don't remember that, but it was actually, we had a lot of water penetrating pretty far, and boats penetrating inland, at least several blocks, even maybe up to a mile. So it's understanding the different threats and also preparing really the same for every storm. Every storm is dangerous, whether it's a tropical storm, Category 1, or even, Category 5s, obviously.
And I remember that when we were at the senior presentation that you gave, you said how people should, if you get a really bad rainstorm and it floods in front of your house all the time when it rains, then you should expect a lot more of the same if a hurricane should come. So taking those things into consideration also.
Exactly. It's understanding where you live and maybe some of the things that are maybe unique to your neighborhood. If you know that as you mentioned, if you know that it floods from a fairly typical summer a thunderstorm, you know that if a tropical storm hurricane is impacting our area, and we could easily get 10, maybe more inches of rain from that, your flooding is going to be just that much worse. So you just need to know that ahead of time. Be familiar with your area. If you have any questions, contact people, maybe your neighbors that have been in the area for a long time. Contact the city, and they may give you some additional information. But really, the bottom line is to be prepared, kind of know the lay of the land, so to speak.
Tell me about high rises. There's a lot of seniors, I think, especially live in high rises, and I think the mentality is that they think it's a strong structure. They don't have to worry about flooding. But it also brings some other problems as far as wind is concerned. Tell me about that.
Well, the wind increases with height. In other words, the wind off the ground, even let's say 100 or even 200 feet off the ground, can be at least 20 to 25 miles an hour higher than what you see on the ground. Now, that's not always the case. A lot of it depends on the exposure of that building to the wind, depending on the wind direction. Maybe there are other buildings in the area that block the wind. But there is definitely that possibility of the winds being much higher in the top part of those buildings. As far as how to prepare in a high-rise, if you live in a high-rise building, you have to take into account the fact that if you lose power, and more than likely you will lose power during a storm, you may not be able to get up and down. You may not be able to get down to the first floor, especially if you live way up in the top. And that's something people need to consider. If you're limited as far as mobility is concerned, that's something you have to consider.